Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerd and nerdettes. Now today I have something extremely special to share with you, as in addition to all the beautiful surrounding blooming flowers, we have an actual man-at-arms joining us today. What? How dare you? To discuss some of the common misconceptions about archery, armored combat, armored knight. So please join me in welcoming the one and only Dequitum.
And thank you very much for inviting me. Your honor.
I'm gonna loot that armor, pretty boy.
You're a kind man. Only a peasant, but the noblest peasant I ever met.
Like you.
Shut up, peasant. You're not invited today.
Just saying. Not a single knighted man. All peasants or men-at-arms. Even Sergeant is technically a man-at-arms and armor.
Oh, did you hear that, Ranger? He called me a man-at-arms. Yeah, I know, it's not a compliment. That's still below a knight. It's still better than a peasant. Can we get back to the video? Yeah, fine, we can, back to your stupid video. So when it comes to knightly combat, the one thing that seems to stick out in everyone's mind when it comes in cinema, television, or even like the Arthurian legend is the sword. Now there is obviously a large amount of weapons available to a knight. The sword does look very cool, it tends to get the most love, but in your experience with armored combat, how effective is a sword? And is it all it's cracked up to be, or would the knights choose different things? And how would that battle look? And why was the sword so prevalent and so popular?
The sword is the most common weapon at the side of a knight. That doesn't mean that it's only a side weapon that were never used. If you are on horseback and charge into battle, the chances are high that the lance will break after you killed someone with it. Then you will grab the sword. Same applies to foot combat, where you can take a pole axe, but if it gets stuck in the opponent's body or an opponent grabs the shaft, you will take your sword. Sword is the biggest and therefore most dangerous weapon that you can carry without getting hindered by it. So, if it is here, I can move my arms freely and it will not restrict me in any way. It's also the most effective weapon in mid to close distance armored and unarmored combat.
All right, hold on. I think we all know the true strength of a knight lies in thy gains, which is why I prefer war hammers, maces, war clubs, blunt damage, concussive force, because they're going to cause damage even through plate. So tell me, good sir, how effective is a sword against your hardened steel?
Indeed, Sir Gain, a sword is not for slashing through armor, and the concussive force isn't that big to kill someone under armor. Same goes for a warhammer or a mace. A sword is much more dangerous because it combines all of them, and it's a stabbing weapon for the gaps of armor. It's like a giant dagger for two hands. You know, when people see me fighting and see how long it takes me and how hard it is to kill someone with a pole hammer or sword, they often say, if I have to kill the knight, I would take a longbow and just shoot them like in Agincourt. They are fools.
Well, you can trust if anyone wishes that was true, it was me. Unfortunately for me, in all of my testing, even with my most powerful warbow here, 160 pounds at 32 inches, with the heavy duty 1600 grain arrows with the bodkin tips, the best I can do is get a pinprick in there, and it's not going all the way through the riveted mail and the padded gamison. Even with the brigandine, when I was going, I'd be fine at 25 yards, 50 yards. Once I hit 75 yards, with that shot, the penetration did diminish a lot. And especially when I got this thing here, which is the 1.5 millimeter C60 hardened steel you sent me. There's just not an arrow around that's gonna make it through. Hold up there, Ranger, hold up. Unless I'm mistaken, you said any arrow. Well, I proved with this 100-pound compound bow. And this 1800 grain arrow from Bishop Archery. I was able to punch through that 1.5 millimeter hardened steel like it was nothing. Enough to go through the mail, everything into the knee. Any arrow from this century. Well, next time say that, because you're wrong. Rambo out. Goodness gracious. So the truth of the matter is that volley fire was key. If you loosed an arrow, you had about 6, 7, 8 seconds of flight going 300 yards, and you had 6,000 archers or 5,000 archers, let's say like an Agincourt, you could theoretically get off 2 volleys before the second one hit the ground. So that's 5,000 or 6,000 arrows, and then the second one's coming right after. So technically, there could be possibly 12,000 arrows in the air at a time. And if you take a skilled archer who can loose 10 to 12 arrows a minute, you could potentially get 72,000 arrows within a minute from that crew of people. So it's mass fire, finding those gaps in that armor and trying to penetrate where they're weakest.
That's absolutely terrifying. Even if only 1% of the arrows find the target, that means nearly 1,000 men will get injured from only 3,000 archers. I never thought about that. Even when they didn't kill most men of their opponents, when the arrow storm ended and the quivers were empty, they forced the opponents to attack first. And attacking on medieval battlefields is always harder than defending a position where you can prepare yourself with trenches and archer stakes.
That's very true. Fortification and defense plays a huge role in every battle. And you can see here I got my makeshift archer stakes. There were many battles in which the archers of English were routed by cavalry when they didn't have time to set up properly or defend themselves. But if you have time to entrench, slow down cavalry, you're gonna have a much better chance. However, one thing I really wanted to ask about, because I think you show it fantastically, and I think the one thing that knights really excelled in was the grappling. It's not something you see often, because when you have 2 men engaging and you can't kill each other with a slash, it's going to come into a clench really quickly. And you highlight the clench and how that looks really well. And I'm curious, I'm familiar with ringing, but is that where most of that grappling technique comes from? Or how do you train to grapple and kill someone? Because I think most of the kills would probably come after the takedown has occurred if you can't just punch through someone with armor.
Indeed. In armored combat, it's much harder to kill someone because vulnerable spots are very small. One way to make it easier to kill a knight is to pin him on the ground, to get the right angle to attack vital organs. That doesn't mean that it's the best option to go immediately into wrestling, because you will have a huge advantage if you wrestle with an injured opponent. And you want to stay at your feet at a battlefield and don't pin yourself to the ground while holding onto a person under you, because then you expose your back and neck.
See, I told you, you can't just wrestle your way out of every situation. You got to have a little bit of tact every now and then. You can't just brute force everything. All I got to say is, who are you going to trust? Someone who spent their life training to be a knight and knows how to forge armor and fight in armor, or someone who lifts weights?
So it's not always a good idea to go for grappling, but the chances are high that it will happen. Medieval people loved training wrestling, and knights even more. Nearly 50% of techniques for armored combat are wrestling techniques from ringing. The biggest difference is that there are always weapons involved, like half-swording or daggers. So there are a lot of changes to normal wrestling. You always have a lever with a weapon and a piercing threat to some areas. So you can never stand still and hold in position to rest, because an opponent can also stab you with different weapons like his swords, his daggers, or your daggers if he can grab them. Touching the ground first means that it's much harder to stand up again, and it's almost impossible to wriggle out of the opponent's grip. Being on top gives also much more force for a dagger to pierce mail armor, and you have much less vision and sensor under the armor with gauntlets and a visor. But fighting against an unarmored opponent with armor on yourself is still much easier, because even a punch of your steel gauntlets can be fatal.
Oh my gosh, this is so boring. How do you make fighting and killing boring, guys? I have one question, which I think is the only one that matters. You two, right now, who would win in an arm wrestling match?
I am not sure if arm wrestling is important for a knight. I mean, most knights were not so massive. You need a lot of endurance muscles and less strength muscles for armored combat. Because remember, a punch can do nearly nothing. It's all about small steps. Don't understand me wrong. Your muscles are impressive, but not that effective for a sword or dagger fight. What do you think, Ranger?
Well, for the record, I would first just like to emphatically state that archer strength trumps knight strength 100% in sheer explosive power. If you have someone who's trained their life to pull back a 160-pound bow, they're going to be able to beat someone in an arm wrestling competition. I genuinely believe that there's not even a comparison there. However, does it translate to martial prowess? Yes and no. Same way you can be explosive with a haymaker or a strike. If you don't have the martial training behind it, it's just going to be a single prayer. And so if you sneak up behind someone and hit them with a powerful strike, sure, it's going to do something, but if you don't have the training and discipline in order to get in there and actually engage with someone as opposed to just swinging wildly, you're going to end up dead really quickly. But just to reiterate, the strength of an archer is going to smash a knight in arm wrestling. I'm standing by that. Hate if you want, but that's the important thing here. That's the important one.
Maybe. I hope we will test it one day. Definitely sounds like a lot of training for a peasant to be an archer. Why should I pay much more money for an archer when I can pay the same price for 3 Milanese crossbowmen? And they are almost your equals in the time frame with distance and power, right?
Well, to answer that question, I will simply say this. You get what you pay for. It's easier to train a crossbowman. However, in my own anecdotal testing with administrative results, the penetration power of my Warbow versus the 600-pound goat's foot crossbow was excellent. It was able to penetrate deeper into the armor than that 600-pound crossbow. The rate of fire was about a 3-2-1, and in addition to that, the distance of a bow can outpace that of most crossbows because there's longer time in connection with the string, meaning you can push that further. The bolt or the arrow is going to be heavier than a crossbow bolt, so there's more mass moving towards you. And lastly, but most importantly, because judging by your armor, you are a man of discerning taste and you value fashion, and a bow itself, a longbow, just looks a whole heck of a lot cooler than a crossbow.
So you shoot at the same speed as my 3 Milanese crossbowmen. And you will tell me that you have better armor penetration?
Don't believe him, my lord. We are worth the money.
First learn to load your crossbow under pressure, peasant.
Hey lord, before you decide who is winning, ask him about accuracy. I bet he isn't good there. Because I know from video games, when you aim with a bow, it's always harder than aiming with a crossbow. Penetration nearly means nothing if you didn't hit the weak spots of armor.
That's an excellent question. Hey Ranger, do you think you hit an apple from more than 30 yards? I think that's a fitting size according to the weaker parts of my armor.
A demonstration, you say? Well, I would be happy to oblige, my lord. Unlike the last one where I kind of hit the weak spots from about 50 yards, I think an apple would be wonderful. However, I don't have an apple, but I have a soda can here. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna set this up on top of the head here, and we're gonna hit that for about 30 yards right in here. So yes, we're gonna show that extra pay is it's well worth it. Well, I'll tell you what, the soda can proved to be somewhat elusive to those shots, but you get the picture.
Hey, that was impressive. Hey peasants, maybe the game's lied to you. Where the f is he? Damn peasants, always running away. Hey Ranger, I will hire you if you're braver than these fearful peasants.
My good sir, I will tell you what, I would be honored to join you on your quest to take over Sword Tube and Bow Tube. However, before our final send-off, I actually had another question for you. A lot of people seem to think that this arrow here, 1600 grain arrows, traveling at almost 200 feet per second, would be enough to knock someone out in their armor or in their helmet. And I think you are, of all people, uniquely qualified to answer the question, would something like this cause that much concussive force to you? Or have you been hit harder with other things and it would probably just be like a hindrance?
I will definitely notice it. It can be loud and annoying. Definitely fearsome, because you never know when an archer has a lucky shot to your visor sights. I did get harder hits in the past, and I cannot remember them hurting me or knocking me out.
Now, one final question for the fans before we go. Would you be willing to brave this here? This is a 160-pound Warbow, the heavy-duty one. Do you think your armor could stop it?
Why not, peasant? Shoot me if you can, peasant.
Oh, I gotta focus. Focus on the visor.
Where's my armor?